And as I said, our story today is Star Wars Episode 4. And one of the first things that people think about when it comes to Star Wars are the characters. And another thing that you think about is that scope of the plot, that epic journey. So we're going to take a deep dive into both of those things and kind of break it down a little more abstract so we can glean what we can out of the storytelling techniques, the devices that George Lucas used that made this movie so iconic and really changed the game in many ways for mainstream storytelling in terms of bringing back the concept of these grand mythological stories. I mean, if you think of the condition of sci-fi in 1977 when Star Wars was made, a lot of film was that, post-apocalyptic, Charlton Heston is the only person left on Earth kind of thing. What George Lucas did was he took a lot of the devices for, epic fantasy mythology, and then he used the setting of science fiction with outer space and planets, and he merged them together, combined with a nostalgia for the classic serials of the 1920s and 30s, or the Flash Gordon era. And he managed to create something that was unique for its time and, like I said, incredibly influential, as we're all aware. Now, when it comes to storytelling, I tend to like the 7-point story structure, and this is my own little spin on it. You've probably seen something similar to this before. We begin with a hook that's kind of the opening image of where the characters are at. Then you have something in their life that needs to change. They make a decision to do something about it. Then you have the fun adventure that they go on because they've made that decision. They eventually end at the lowest point because the consequences of that decision rear their ugly head. And then they get out and then they reach a new world where, because they went on this great adventure, they had this character growth. So not really abnormal. This is something I'm sure you're familiar with. Now, the hook of Star Wars is a really great one on multiple levels. You'll know that the movie begins with that iconic opening shot, right? The giant Empire ship and the little rebellion ship, and it's a great show, don't tell as to the situation. You can see that imposing ship versus the underdog, right? So that immediately puts us on the side of the underdog. That's just kind of human nature. We don't really like big bullies. So we are rooting for these underdogs. And of course, it doesn't take long before we see that big old ship is led by very sinister people. In fact, Darth Vader, who is that first major representation of the Empire, has that deep booming voice and mechanical and is very unhuman. The mechanical features and more machine now than man, as Obi-Wan would say in another movie. Now, the question of Star Wars involves our protagonist, Luke Skywalker, and that's, how is he going to find his place in all of this chaos? Because he's there, he's out of the action, he's on Tatooine, as he says, if there's a center of the universe, I'm on the planet that's furthest from. It's very flat, it's desolate, it's not particularly attractive. I mean, I think the desert can be attractive, but they deliberately made the Tatooine landscape, very flat and not very decorative. The only time it looks kind of beautiful is when Luke is actually looking off the planet at the binary sunset, right? And he has that scene, and it's like, if only I could get off of here. And that's like the one scene where they depict Tatooine as somewhat of a beautiful place. Otherwise, it feels very harsh, very hostile. And so you really do want him to get off of it, right? And so he does make that decision, and that is to get off the planet. Now, Luke is a bit of a reluctant hero, which kind of feels old-fashioned a bit in a modern era. Nowadays, we tend to like our protagonists to be more empowered. So, Luke's decision is rather strong-armed. His uncle and aunt get vaporized, and so it forces him to go on the journey in a way, because, like, what does he have left? And I have heard from people that they don't resonate. It doesn't resonate as well with them as if he had to make that decision. I think, again, that speaks to different audiences for different eras and whatnot. Nowadays, I think a lot of people, especially like millennial and younger, they really look at the world as rather restrictive and not a lot of opportunity. And so they're really looking for characters that are empowered and can control their own destiny. uh, it's wish fulfillment sort of thing. So that is something that's a little bit different. But regardless, even though his uncle and honor vaporize, he still has to make the brave decision to join Obi-Wan and go on that quest. It's also interesting that Obi-Wan is the one that's asked to save the princess, not Luke. You often will find with writers they'll be so worried that to make their protagonist important that they'll kind of set up, well, it's a prophecy or you have to do it, or the original, and the original request even has to involve the protagonist. Not necessary. It works totally well. That's not a great way of putting it. It works perfectly well for Luke Skywalker to be kind of the tag along and then grow up into that as his mentor gets defeated a little bit later on by Darth Vader. And it's very similar if you think of Lord of the Rings with Gandalf and Frodo. Again, it's getting to those classic archetypes usually found in fantasy or mythology. So we get to the fun and games. Luke goes off on the planet, and we have all those wonderful set pieces that we associate with Star Wars. The initial jump to light speed, the encounter on the Death Star, the duel between Obi-Wan and Darth Vader, the escape from the Death Star, the dogfight, all of those great action set pieces that made up a fair amount of the movie trailer. What I often recommend to writers is think about your fun and games early on in your process. Walt Disney actually would develop entire films based around this. He would often think of, what's that ultimate promise of the premise? We have this concept of where we want the character to go. Well, let's talk about that scene, that pivotal scene where you're having the most fun in the world and everything's going great, and what that beautiful moment or that exciting moment, and then you kind of build the rest of the story around it. You definitely want to make sure you are building to those great set pieces. It's the kind of work when you write, it's like, oh, I hope somebody makes a movie out of this. That's that. If you can have that in your mind, you'll be in much better shape. And often it is more or less what we start with. You have that initial hook, that what if scenario, and you're like, oh, what if this happened? What if this happened? And you end up basically writing around that. Nothing wrong with that. Then we get to the pit, sometimes called like the dark night of the soul, or the hero's lost. This is when everything looks hopeless, and we're all familiar with this part of stories. Successful stories do set this up, though. They don't just kind of throw in this severe consequence that comes from left field. It's almost like a deus machina for an ending, but it's like a deus machina for the conflict before the ending. And I've seen that happen where it's like all of a sudden it's like, whoa, well, that escalated quickly. They're going great on their adventure, and then you threw it in. But Star Wars does a great job, because ultimately the pit of Star Wars is, Luke is there. He's in the trench. Essentially, the walls are closing in. The Death Star is going to blow up all of his friends. Han Solo is nowhere to be found, so he's been abandoned. His mentor is dead, and Darth Vader is closing in on him, And so these are all things that were set up well in the story. And it's a great pivotal moment where all seems lost. And then we have the climbing out. Now, in Star Wars, Han Solo does help Luke Skywalker with the climbing out. However, one reason why it doesn't feel like a cheat is because, remember, Luke Skywalker ultimately has to blow up the Death Star. So even though Han Solo comes back and he gets rid of Darth Vader, it's Luke Skywalker that ultimately destroys the Death Star, which is the representation of the Empire, which by my calculations is really the antagonist of Episode 4. And I'll show you my breakdown of characters to explain that a little bit better. But you'll notice too, when Han Solo comes in, they set that up well, where Leia says, I wonder if he cares about anyone or anything. It's all money is all that he's concerned about. And so when he comes back in, you're like, yay, so it's a character growth moment, not just a random, oh, well, somebody's bailing our hero out because the writer wrote themselves into a corner. It's a very fulfilling scene. It's that stand up and cheer moment, which is what you're looking for. So finally, we get to the new world, right? And Luke Skywalker goes from Joe Blow Schmo on Tatooine that nobody's ever heard of, the planet furthest from the center of the universe, right? The most humble of beginnings, more or less, in the universe that we know about, to someone who's honored in the rebellion, having destroyed the most powerful vehicle in the galaxy. So quite a character growth, right? To go from there to there. So that's one reason Star Wars has that epic feel. Now, when it comes to characters, Star Wars is a great work to study for that character complement, what I often call like the chess piece of characters. So we often have the what I call the core characters, and these are the characters that are really driving the action. So Luke Skywalker is the protagonist. The Empire, I have General Tarkin there as a symbol, is really the antagonist. And then you have the relationship character. The relationship character is that mentor, that guardian character. Very clear in Star Wars, when you have Obi-Wan Kenobi, or in Lord of the Rings with Gandalf, or Dumbledore and Harry Potter. They're not always quite as archetypical as that. Sometimes it's a much more subtle person that just kind of relates to the themes of the story. For example, Dark Knight, in my opinion, the relationship character would be the Joker, which might throw you off a little bit. But if you think about who actually has to explain to Batman the way that the world works and helps him on his journey, um, it's the Joker. One way you can tell if the relationship is, if the antagonist is really the villain, is if when the villain is defeated, is the story over? Because, like, for example, in the Dark Knight, the Joker's defeated, but the movie's not over. He still has to face off with Two-Face. In Finding Nemo, it's another example. Nemo is really the antagonist because he's the one that's driving Marlin, and fighting against what Marlin wants, which is to keep him safe. And so you have the dentist, and they free Nemo from the dentist, and yet the story's not over. You have to have the scene with the net, and Nemo gets caught in the net, and you have the relationship character of Dory in that movie. Now, we also have a distraction character, sometimes called the contagonist. I just like distraction character better. And that's Darth Vader. Now, just as the antagonist is an obstacle against what the protagonist wants, the distraction character is usually that thematic opposite of the relationship character. So again, Star Wars is a great work to study for this, because you have Obi-Wan Kenobi, the light side of the Force, the good side of the Force, and Darth Vader, the dark side of the Force, the evil side of the Force. So work really well with each other. Now, for thematic characters, these are the characters that get into the mind of the world. They relate how different people react to different things in the world. So you have support characters, sidekicks, C3PO and R2D2. They're just kind of along for the ride. You have opposition characters like Han Solo. They're the skeptics, the cynics. They're the ones that are always like, I don't think this is going to work. I'm not so sure about this. Can you really pull this off? And you have emotion characters like Chewbacca that just kind of react instinctively and animalistically. Of course, Chewbacca, he's a completely different species. So that makes it a lot easier to get that animalistic reaction. So again, gets to the fact that Star Wars is such a great work to study for these archetypes. And then reason, you have Princess Leia. Princess Leia is the one who wants to know what the plan is, wants to figure things out, wants to reason her way out of situations. And we'll get to examples as we go through the script. So the beginning of this work is a very famous sentence: a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. Now, there are many reasons why this is so effective. For one, this is often considered a science fiction story, although I really would call it more of a fantasy, even though it has a science fiction setting. And one of the reasons why is because of this beginning. This is really just a once upon a time. This is telling you that this is a story that is the story that's been passed on down. It has resonance. If we remember a story from a long time ago, it's because it speaks to something universal. It speaks to something about humanity, right? And the fact that it's a galaxy far, far away, well, that frees up George Lucas to basically make this whatever he wants. He's essentially made this a blank canvas. It does not have to really fit into the world as we know it, or history as we know it, or anything like that. And that really, again, makes it more of a fantasy. Sci-fi is more about plausible reality, and fantasy is more about, themes and wish fulfillment. So we have that opening crawl, which is essentially just this big information dump. But one reason why it's effective and not boring is because of what it's relating to us, right? It's not telling us backstory that is just, well, there was this guy and then he became ruler and then they had this economic system, or, this planet has this sort of life and this sort of trees and these sort of, it's not just world building, it's actually conflict, right? The first sentence, it is a period of civil war, have won their first victory, it's just right into action. Even if it's telling us action, it's action nonetheless, right? And it even sets up the ultimate weapon, the Death Star, an armored space station with enough power to destroy an entire planet. So, talk about raising stakes, right? Immediately from the get go, second paragraph, or I guess third paragraph, if you count the little prologue, um, third paragraph, it's like, bam, these are the stakes. There is a weapon that can blow up your whole world. So that's not bad. That's, if you're gonna do an information dump sort of device to start off your work, just to set the stage, you know, raise the stakes, and that's not necessarily, it could pay off. It paid off here, right? And you'll one of the reasons why I think George Lucas went this way is not only to pay tribute to Flash Gordon, but he knew he was going to have a long, kind of slower segment, right? With C3PO and R2D2, and they're exploring this desert planet, and then Luke Skywalker is just kind of there, and he's a moisture farmer, which, that's like watching the grass grow. Who wants to really watch moisture farming? I don't even know. I guess the like condensed clouds, like, I don't know. It sounds really boring, right? So since he knows he's going to spend a lot of time just setting up the stage, setting the world, making you feel immersed in this well-worn universe. That's one thing people love about Star Wars, is just it feels kind of dirty and used and real. And he spends that time to establish that. To set the stakes early on is very helpful, because you're not going to see Alderaan blow up for some time. And you do start off, though, with tension even in the action after this opening crawl. Because you have C3PO, the first line in the movie, "Did you hear that? They've shut down the main reactor. We'll be destroyed for sure. This is madness." So immediately thrust into the action, in res. It's a great way to get us started. You also notice, and this is something people pointed out a lot, that it is interesting that you do not start with Luke, you start with the sidekick characters. Interesting strategy. Um, One reason why this works well is because, since Luke, again, isn't going to encounter Darth Vader, isn't going to encounter the Empire in a direct way for some time, really the only way for us to get that information and for us to understand the threat that Luke is facing, what he is up against as soon as he leaves Tatooine, is to get into somebody else's head. Because otherwise, I guess you could have somebody come to Tatooine, relay the story to Luke, but that, let's be there. That's much better. So this is an effective way of beginning the story. It's like the monster approaches sort of feel, almost like a horror film or Jurassic Park, where you see the velociraptors attack, because you're going to have to spend a long time before you get back to dinosaurs attacking. So here we establish Darth Vader, and he comes in, which is interesting that the antagonist, the Empire, and this distraction character, they're the ones that are front and center from the beginning, and it gives them that imposing feeling throughout the whole piece. You have that sense of weight, that this is a big thing that this little guy is going to be up against. Now, along the way, when George Lucas was developing Star Wars, he made a lot of changes. You can find archives of different drafts of scripts. But one of the things that was removed towards the end of production was the character Biggs. He was reduced quite a lot. Originally, he was going to be there on Tatooine and they were going to have a conversation. Biggs was a soldier and Luke was kind of jealous that he was getting to see all this action. And meanwhile, Luke is just sitting there in Tatooine, twiddling his thumbs. And the reason why this would be so effective is because at the very end of the movie, Biggs is one of the last rebels to get blown up. And so it's like you're removing all those crutches, right? You remove Obi-Wan Kenobi and then you remove Biggs. And so it's like you're raising those stakes. Over time, Biggs was basically removed to the point where in the original cut, he was just a random kind of rebel pilot, and you could tell that he carried weight with Luke, but you didn't quite know why. If you had read like novelizations and comics, I think they still talked about it, but in the movie edit, you didn't really know. I think since then, I always find this hard to keep up. Maybe somebody can correct me. I believe if you like watch it now on Disney Plus, if you can watch, I think you can watch on Disney Plus or Netflix, whoever owns the rights to it, you will see the scene with Biggs before they go to the Death Star attack. I think that one has been added in. I know it was added in the special edition, but I can't remember if he pulled it. But anyway, what this gets to is when you are setting up somebody to be destroyed, you kind of have a red shirt problem, to use a Star Trek metaphor. And that's if the audience can too clearly set up that you're setting up somebody for no good reason, except that the character is upset when they die, it can feel a little bit like a trick. And in the meantime, it can kind of feel like you're wasting someone's time. Uh, the Incredibles, Brad Bird had this problem. There was supposed to be a pilot that would take Mrs. Incredible over to the island. You see a picture of him, but he eliminated the character. He just found that he was spending way too much time to have to set up the character, set up Mrs. Incredible and his relationship just to kill him off. And what was the point? So, yeah, he's no longer in the movie. He just said, Mrs. Incredible can fly. That'll fix that problem. All right, so yeah, here is where we see that line I was saying. Luke, if there's a bright center to the universe, you're on the planet furthest from. And I think that's a great character moment in terms of telling us about the world as well as telling us about something about the character, right? And his attitude towards the world. Always a great thing as a writer if you can do multiple things at the same time. Saves time on the page for sure. All right. So in this scene with Aunt Beru and Uncle Owen, you have this foreshadowing about Darth Vader, which doesn't get paid off until later films. Uh, Aunt Bruce says he can't stay here forever. Most of his friends have gone. It means so much to him. And Owen says, I'll make it up to him next year. I promise. And Aunt Bruce says, Luke's just not a farmer, Owen. He has too much of his father in him. And Owen says, that's what I'm afraid of. Now, without the context of who his father is, it's still a great scene, which is why this is great foreshadowing, because it tells us we want Luke to move on from this. Even his own guardians tell that he doesn't belong here. And we are kind of wondering about his father, and Luke's going to ask about his father in the next scene with Obi-Wan. And so, we do have that whole, trying to find out your place in the universe. And the fact that Luke is so adrift, he doesn't even know his own lineage. Gives him that vulnerability. It's common in fantasy stories to make characters orphans. Disney does it all the time. It works really well because it does give you that sense of, well, I don't even know, my bloodline, let alone, what I can do for society. It's just that extra step. Now, when we get to Obi-Wan Kenobi, we have a lot of information that needs to be given out, a lot of exposition. And George Lucas does it very well, even though he does it in a direct sort of way that you might not think you could get away with. And there's a couple of reasons why it works. All right, so you have Obi-Wan Kenobi talking about your father's lightsaber. This is the weapon of a Jedi Knight, not as clumsy or as random as a blaster. And then Luke just starts playing with it, right? So while Obi-Wan Kenobi is giving all of this, exposition, Luke is playing with that lightsaber. So we as an audience is like, oh, look at the lightsaber. That's really cool. Oh, it's like a laser gun. And yeah, this guy's saying stuff and we're kind of grasping it, but we don't have to give it our full undivided attention, which makes it much more interesting to watch the whole movie. If it just focused on him and Luke was just sitting there, it wouldn't be nearly as interesting. Because it would bring to mind more that what's going on is, oh, this is exposition, exposition, exposition. The fact that we have this little distraction going on makes it go down a lot easier. And of course, Obi-Wan really tells the story in such a, I'm sitting around the campfire and telling this ancient tale of old, right? An elegant weapon for a more civilized time. For over 1,000 generations, the Jedi Knights were the guardians of peace and justice in the Old Republic before the Dark Times, before the Empire. And, Alec Guinness's reading of that is so spectacular. But you'll notice, even though this is a fair amount of information, it's still really succinct and quick, 3 sentences. And then when he talks about Darth Vader, it's 4 sentences, short sentences. It still doesn't take much time. We're just getting this high level. But I think this grandiose way of putting it really gives it that sense of depth. This is this grand old tale, and it's very important. And you'll notice Luke didn't pay attention to anything really being said exactly, because he says blah, 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 Jedi, Jedi, Jedi. And he goes back to, how did my father die? Which was really back to what Obi-Wan said at the beginning of the conversation. Your father's lightsaber. And then he says a bunch of sentences, and Luke's just like, so how did my father die? Because that's what he's interested in. And again, that's probably in some ways maybe what the audience is interested too. So the writer is going along with the audience. Now, Obi-Wan, again, like I said, he does this succinct but powerful explanation of Darth Vader, and then he says the Force, and Luke says, what is the Force? And it's always great to have a character in a story that doesn't know something that the audience doesn't know, because then you can have an excuse for somebody to explain it to them. It's often why in magic stories you'll have the unmagical person, the muggle, as it were, that comes into the alternate universe. Sci-fi stories, there's often the scientifically illiterate person. In Sherlock Holmes, you have the Watson character who's mentally behind Sherlock a lot of the time. So it's always great to have characters like this when it makes sense, because then you can have a character explain and not have the, well, as you know, let me talk about things that everyone knows about. And yeah, that doesn't work very well. So in this next scene, what we have is another information dump scene, and this is a conference room scene. These are very hard to write, right? You have somebody sitting, well, you have a bunch of people sitting down at a desk having a conversation, and just a bunch of talking heads. Difficult. Well, how George Lucas makes this scene really pay off is, again, he makes sure he loops back to his world building and the concepts that he's developed, and he uses this as a way to demonstrate a cool, fantastical thing. So you have this debate going on, and you do have a few different points of view about how to handle the situation. Mahdi's like, I suggest we use the Death Star, fight, fight, fight. And Darth Vader's like, not so hasty. And then Mahdi is all ragging on Darth Vader because Darth Vader believes in this, hokey old religion and everything. And you have the famous scene where he gets choked, and Darth Vader gives the great line, I find your lack of faith disturbing. A very understated response to the fact that somebody can randomly choke you. So it gives you that sense of control from Darth Vader. It's sarcasm, so it's funny. And hey, if you can write a conference room scene that ends up with a quote that people want to put in a t-shirt because it is that much of a zinger, go for it. Because that's really, really great writing. I mean, this work was nominated for Best Screenplay for the Academy Awards, which, considering a lot of the people on the project thought it was juvenile and weird and unsophisticated, got to give it some credit. All right, so we have another great scene where we get the demonstration of the Force powers, where it just kind of happens, where Obi-Wan Kenobi is just waving his hand. You don't need to see this. These are not the words we're looking for. Go about your business. And it's a great little moment. Now, one thing you will notice throughout this work that I find to be an interesting artistic choice is the troopers are often comedically portrayed. And that's interesting, considering the Empire is the big antagonist of the story. They're the big looming force. But I think one reason why George Lucas went that direction is so it could have a little bit less heaviness to it. If it was just sinister forces all throughout, it really would weigh down the whole work. I mean, Star Wars overall is an inspirational sort of story. You end up wanting to live in the world, even though it's currently a world under occupation. And if you really felt that all the stormtroopers were on the level of like Darth Vader, it would just seem so sinister and evil. It would just be so gloomy. It would be hard to overcome that. Another reason why I believe he makes them rather foolish is because he wants to make sure that it's believable that Luke Skywalker and Han Solo can do some of the crazy antics they do on the Death Star, and not to mention when you have this big antagonist, the Death Star, essentially, which is the ultimate power of the Empire that can blow up a whole planet. Not everything about it has to be spectacular, right? That's such a great threat that, by having these dopey sort of officers, you haven't eliminated the tension. Not really. So we get our introduction to Han Solo, our skeptical character, and you'll notice his speech pattern quite different, especially in comparison to Obi-Wan, much more relaxed. He's constantly asking these kind of abrasive questions. Questions, of course, are a great way to do dialogue, to write dialogue where, somebody asks a question and they answer the question and you just pile questions. It's simple, but it can be effective. It can string along a conversation well. And then we have the iconic scene that's rather infamous with Han Solo facing off with Greedo, this classic Western style shootout, which George Lucas has tinkered with plenty of times to the dismay of some of his fans. But it really is this great character moment where we have an idea of the type of person that Han Solo is. And of course, it shows us a little bit of his vulnerability. He's got a price on his head. So it makes us a little more sympathetic as to how mercenary he is, considering the predicament he's gotten himself into. Now, once they get to Princess Leia, you really get that idea of those character types playing off of each other. The protagonist, the opposition character, and the reason character. Because look at the way the scene plays out. Luke says there isn't any way out, and then Han says, "I can't hold them off forever. Now what?" So very like, what are we gonna do? I don't think this is gonna work. Negative. And then Leia says, "This is some rescue. When you came in here, didn't you have a plan for getting out?" So again, trying to get back to reason. Can we figure out what to do? Like, we've got a plan. And then Han's like, "He's the brain, sweetheart." Again, very anti the protagonist, right? Criticizing, sarcasm. He doesn't know what he's doing. Good luck figuring out what we're gonna do next. And Han, what the hell are you doing? It's just more and more negativity, right? And then Leia's like, "Someone has to save our skins." Into the garbage chute, wise guy. So she certainly has her sass, but what way her character manifests itself is, she's gonna take matter in her own hands. They obviously can't stay there forever. What's a good reasonable solution? Well, I don't know. How about let's shoot a big hole into this drain and jump right in. And Chewbacca is the one that's scared to do it, right? And so he's that emotional character, and Han has to push him in there. And you get the same sort of interaction later where you have this fun conversation, where Han is, "I'm in it for the money." And she's like, "Well, if money is all that you love, then that's what you'll receive." Again, very reasonable response, right? Very matter of fact. And your friend is quite the mercenary. I wonder if he really cares about anything or anyone, just giving him a psychological diagnosis and moving on with her life. And Luke's like, "Well, I care." He's the kind of goody two shoes protagonist. uh, Lots of fun there. And yeah, this scene scripted here is where you have Biggs coming back in, which I think there's a version of the scene again, like I said, in the special edition versions, and that's just to set up that Biggs is going to be that last little ratchet up of tension before Luke has to do the Death Star, blow it up. All right. So when it comes to this final trench scene, this is often that big scene that people think of for A New Hope. It really is that pivotal moment, that iconic ending. And when we think of great climaxes of fiction, the Death Star trench battle, it's got to be on up there. So let's look at it from a mechanical standpoint. What is going on in this scene? I'm going to move myself over a little bit. So we have a few characters in play. We actually have a few characters that speak, but really all of these 8 characters are in this final climax, are involved in what is going on. The characters that will end up speaking will be Luke, Obi-Wan, Darth Vader, Han Solo. However, you have the antagonist, the Death Star is there, and the support character, emotion character, reason, well, they're Yavin 4. They're awaiting to be blown up by the Death Star. And so everyone is involved in the scene, even if they're not speaking. So you begin with, Luke Skywalker heading down the trench. All of the other X-Wing pilots have been shot. Darth Vader is approaching him on his tail. I have you now. And you're like, well, there we go. That's it, right? All is lost. Of course, Han Solo comes in and he shoots Darth Vader, and Darth Vader's like, what's going on? And then he gets taken out. He gets moved, and he's all rotating out in the middle of the galaxy there. And Han Solo gives the iconic line, let's blow this thing and go home. And so Luke Skywalker still has to take care of the antagonist. He approaches the end, shoots it. Yeah, the antagonist is blown up. It is gone. And we go back to Han Solo, who says, great shot, kid. That was 1 in a million. And then we have Obi-Wan as a ghost give you the force will be with you always. Just a beautiful scene because from a mechanical standpoint and that rhythm of how you're handing off from one character to the next. You'll find when you think of really, really snappy endings, you'll often find that the protagonist has some sort of face off with the antagonist, and then that relationship character comes in and it all just buttons up really nicely. Star Wars is a great example for something that's maybe not as obviously a representation of this. We have Casablanca, where you have Rick, and he has to hand off Elsa to Victor, and so that is the antagonist. The antagonist actually wins in that story. It is a tragedy, and then Rick has to go back to his the relationship character, the French officer, and I'm forgetting his name. And he does that, Louis, and he does that. Louis, this is the beginning of a beautiful friendship, which is that wonderful last line of dialogue, and they walk off on the sun in the sunset together. So you get that great reconciliation at the end. So something to model in your own work. Think about it. Think about who your protagonist is, your antagonist, relationship character, and see if you can box all that at once. And if you have an opposition character, see if maybe they come in at the end and they kind of give the hero a pat on the back and kind of I was kind of wrong, or something like that. Because that can really pay off well too, is when the person who is the big skeptic the whole time kind of warms up to the hero. It can make you feel like quite an accomplishment. All right, so that is a look at Star Wars Episode 4, A New Hope. I certainly hope that you found this discussion interesting, and I would love to hear some of your thoughts. If you have any thoughts, what are some different things that you have learned from this work, or different pieces of writing advice, that you've gleaned from it? Any questions about any of the points I brought up? I know I have a tendency to like blather on, so. Anything out there? Yeah, go ahead, Leody. You can unmute your mic, or you can put it in the chat.
Well, thank you so much for doing this. The one thing I remember from high school is going to see Star Wars. I don't remember anything else. But I have, over the years of taking screenwriting classes, there's they talk a lot about the bar scene, and I just was wondering what your thoughts would be on that.
Well, specifically, what about the bar scene? That it's just a great, like, kind of let's get going sort of scene, or just the set piece of it, or?
Well, it was, and it's been a while, but they were talking about the bar, which is essentially what it is where people meet, different characters meet, talk to each other. We have Obi-Wan showing his power. I think it's just a great tool, and it works really well in the movie.
Yes, I mean, it gets back to that whole, if you're gonna have a scene where people have to talk and give some exposition, how do
Yes.
you make it interesting? What's great about the cantina scene is ultimately this is just let's get the chess pieces in place. Obi-Wan is gonna make a deal with Han Solo and everything. And that could be done almost anywhere. But what they do with what George Lucas did with the cantina scene is he gives us a little bit into the world building. This is what
Oh, yes.
these people do on Tatooine just to unwind. It gives you a sense of the different species, the variety of creatures that live in the universe, humor. It's always important. And that's getting back to the stormtroopers as well. Sometimes when people are building or world building for fantasy and sci-fi, they just want to take it so seriously, and they forget that in any culture, in any world, there's going to be things that are humorous that people can find funny, and it actually only makes it more serious to have that because you can take it more realistically.
Hmm. Thank you.
Oh, you're very welcome.
Mhm.
Does anybody else have any comments? But it is interesting that was your big memory from childhood. Yeah, it's like I want to say like an earworm, but it's not quite. But it's that meme that sticks in your head. There's so many things from Star Wars, because it speaks to so many bigger philosophical things, like the concept of a force and kind of this new age sort of feeling that everything has a life force. And it's a very beautiful sort of Eastern religion sort of philosophy that kind of mixes in with these classic mythologies from like Greek heritage. It's a really great blend of different universal human themes. All right. Well, I am glad that you joined us. If you are interested in some more AutoCrit Live programming, on Sunday, we are going to have the Story Doctor, and that will be hosted by me, and I will be in my doctor outfits answering questions about perhaps things that you're working on. So, maybe there's a character and you're not quite sure how to write them, or there's a story hook you're kind of trapped on, or you've kind of written yourself into a corner, or you just have a question about maybe some sort of writing technique. This is a chance for you to come in, ask these questions, and you're obviously a learned group of people as well, so we can also have the wisdom of the crowds, helping us out answering these questions as well. So the
You will
Story Doctor is Sundays at 8 p.m. And so I can see you there, 8 p.m. Eastern. You can check it out at autocrit.com/live and get a look at that. Leotie, did you have a question?
One more.
Yes.
Where were you able to obtain the script for that?
If you look online, you can find a fair amount of that stuff. There's different databases that have it.
Mhm.
It's purchasable in a lot of different places. Um, I'm trying to think of the one that I tend to use, but if you just Google like scripts, you'll be able to find it because
Okay.
there's a
All right.
lot of resources out there for script writers. So
Oh, good. Thank you.
yeah, no worries. All right. So anyway, if you are like I said, Sunday at 8 p.m. and otherwise there are a lot of other great shows like this for you to get involved with. We have community shows, we have game shows, whatever you would like in terms of writing. This is really where the big writing channel. So if you want to get involved, like I said, autocrit.com/live, and you can take a look at all of our upcoming programs. So thank you so much for joining me today, and may the force be with you.